blog to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve McKnight. And today on the show, we're talking about what must you do when you buy a house. And we are specifically talking about today the LIM Report. Now, listen up. We're going to get a wee bit nerdy, but it is important that you listen to this because this couple that we're about to talk to you about, they lost $355,000 because they missed out on this very one simple thing. So, Andrew, tell us the story about what's happened here.
We've got the article up for anyone on the YouTube today, and then we'll talk about this on the podcast. There was an Auckland couple who bought a property on Auckland's North Shore back in 2015, which was sold at auction by Barfoot and Thompson. Now, they're keen on the house. The auction gets brought forward, so that happens when someone else makes a pre-auction offer and it gets accepted. So they've got 2 days to do their due diligence. So they're really pressured to get everything done on time. Now, luckily, like with many auctions, the LIM report was already on file. Barfoot and Thompson had it already there, so they didn't need to go and order their own. They downloaded it, sent it to their lawyer. Lawyer said, yeah, this is all good. Go buy the house.
So they do. Then what happens? 4 years into the future, and we're 4 years into the future, they go to sell that property. The new agent, and they decide to sell through Barfoot and Thompson again because they seem to do a good job. New agent requests the LIM report, and then what comes back? Oh, there's a wee thing in here that says that the property, what is it? I'll put it up on the screen for you guys on YouTube. There was a letter received from the owner's solicitor saying there were major moisture-related cladding defects.
Major moisture defects. So that means it's a leaky home.
Yeah, essentially. And then the couple who bought this are saying, well, we didn't send a letter to the council over the last 4 years. We've had nobody touch the LIM in 4 years. So what's happened here?
So the original owners had removed the clause from the LIM report which said a letter's been received from the owner's solicitor informing us of major moisture and cladding issues. So the purchasers, the people that own it now, made a decision based on a fraudulent document that was provided to the real estate agent.
So wait a second. So what happened? The original owners just whited it out or photoshopped it.
I'm not having that. Wiped it out and sent it to Barfoot and Thompson. And then, of course, what happened is the current owners had to sell the property as is. It was sold for, wait for it, $25,000 less than what they bought it for 4 years ago. And over that period, the market had gone up in value. So when you compare it to what they would have got if there wasn't fraudulent behaviour, they're short by $355,000.
Oh, so we will dig into what you can do to avoid that similar situation. But first, let's talk about what happened to the couple who doctored the LIM report and what's going to happen to them. Well, what the purchasers did was they reported it to the police because this is a criminal matter. The police arrested the couple.
Arrested them?
They arrested the couple who doctored the LIM.
Imagine 4 years, you think you're sweet. I wonder what the statute of limitations were. That's why I was thinking about this before. Do you know what the statute of limitations would be on this?
It would be 7 years.
It was 7 years. You're probably pretty safe because people tend to own houses for about 7 years.
Well, they weren't in this case because rat-a-tat-tat, what's that at the door? It's the police.
It's a bobby at the door.
And so they get arrested, taken in for questioning. The police then come and seize their laptops to go through and look for evidence. Now, what do they find? They find emails from the couple's joint account to the real estate agent at the time with things like, quote, you will be relieved to hear the nasty thing has been removed. And, quote, just waiting on the LIM to be corrected.
Oh.
So because of that, they knew it was fraudulent and say that these things were being taken out. Now, in the meantime, the husband and the couple that sold the house originally had become a real estate agent himself.
What?
Yeah, so
he was thinking that was easy.
Well, his license has been suspended now, and they could face up to 10 years in jail for producing and using that fraudulent document effectively, let's be honest, to deceive the people who purchased that property because they are selling it for more than they would otherwise get.
So the big question is, what should you do to avoid the same thing happening to you? Well, it's quite interesting because it is not uncommon for a LIM to be provided in an auction pack. In fact, I think it's probably there 100% of the time, as far as I know. And when I was talking to Sue Foley, friend of the show, and my personal lawyer, when it comes to conveyancing matters, she said you absolutely always want to order your own LIM, because not just for situations like this, but if there's no recourse whatsoever if you haven't ordered a LIM yourself. And she said I would never rely on a LIM that's more than 6 months old anyway.
And we'll just show you, for you guys watching on YouTube, what a LIM actually looks like. It's just a big, hefty council document. Here's one on
How many pages is this? About 100 or something normally?
This one is 82, I think. This is one that...
A short one.
It's a shorter one, but this is one for a property that I purchased. Now, Andrew... we've got this big hefty document in front of us. How many times in your life have you read a LIM?
Ed, you know that I don't read an email longer than a paragraph long. There's not a chance that I was ever going to read something like that. It put me to sleep every night. I ask Sue to read this and tell me if there's anything I need to know before I buy anything, but I never read them myself.
So she'll go through and do it, or
Absolutely.
your lawyer will generally.
Now, what we do in a normal course of purchasing, whether it's auction or otherwise, is you order your own LIM or you have your lawyer do it. It's really interesting. So in Christchurch, a lawyer will typically order the LIM for you. Outside Christchurch, that's quite uncommon. You normally have to email the council where you're buying and have them send you the file. But anyway, whoever's ordering it, you just got to make sure you've got it yourself, have it addressed to you. Reason one is then you've got an undoctored account. So, I remember there was a story from Kyle Brooklyn on a previous podcast. And
He's a building inspector.
Yeah, building inspector. And
with the deep voice.
Yeah, and he was saying that someone had provided one of his building inspections to someone who was looking at buying a property off them and had edited things out of it. So you've just got to be really careful not to cheap out when you're spending so much money on a valuable asset like a house and not have your own things. You want to make sure that you've got the LIM and you've got the building inspection yourself. It's okay to maybe get your lawyer to go through the one that's on the file to begin with to make sure, oh yeah, there's no red flags here, and then order one to make sure that it is an original copy. But I would always make sure that you've done that.
And just to dig into what happened with Kyle Brooklyn, so he did the building inspection, gave it to the person selling the property, and that was provided on to subsequent purchasers. And you're right, what had happened was the vendor, again, had taken out some of the clauses, some of the parts of the document that showed things wrong with it. Now, then what happened was when these the issues with the property were found out, the person who buys the property goes back to Kyle. It's like, hey, you missed out on all these things. He's like, no, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Kyle would have been...
Kyle, Kyle, he'll be like, no, I didn't. Pulls it out. But he's like, no, I wrote it right here. Then the person's like, oh, well, do I have any recourse? No.
Because you didn't pay me to get you didn't pay me to do a building inspection.
Well, what they should have done in that instance was just request the building inspection from the building inspector, and it might cost you a bit of money, but it's got to be addressed to you. That's the important thing.
It's the same as evaluation. And actually, did I ever tell you about the time that, so we had a website for any earthquake damaged properties, and it was essentially we'd buy any property in any state, we'll just give you a price for it, let us know. Anyway, I got this inquiry late at night one time, hey, we want to sell this property, and I think it was Cranford Street, Christchurch. Can you have a look at it? We'll accept significantly less than the valuation. So I said, great, send me the details and send me the valuation. Anyway, I look at the valuation, and it's by Fiona Stewart, who's a friend of mine that I've used for valuations for years. Yeah, from Bailey's. And I think this has got to be the worst formatted valuation I've ever seen. I mean, bear in mind, I've seen hundreds of them. And I realised it was completely fake. So I emailed it to her and said, have a look at this. And she rings me the next day and she's like, I can't believe it.
She'd be fuming.
She was fuming. And so anyway, I wrote back to the guy and I said, hey, look, I know you've done this. Can you just give me an actual price of what you're looking for it rather than the thing? Anyway, he went absolutely mental. I'll show you the emails afterwards. You might enjoy them.
Oh, yes, please. Now, the second reason that it's really important to order your own LIM or do what we suggested when you're getting a building inspection, get it straight from the building inspector, is that if something is missed on the report, you have some recourse to then go back to council or go back to the building inspector and hit them up about it. Because once it's in your name, there is a duty of care for you. So I'll give you another example of a comment that I read on the Herald. They were talking about a young couple who purchased a home and that had a potbelly fireplace within the property. And it showed on the LIM, all good. They purchased this property. Now, 3 years later, they go to sell that home and somebody purchasing the property decides to order the LIM directly from council. Exactly what we are suggesting here. Now, on the council documents, doesn't look like the fireplace exists on there. And so this shows a bit of a red flag, right? Because then the purchaser's like, well, this fireplace isn't on the LIM. That means it's unconsented. That means, we've got an issue here. Perhaps it shouldn't legally be there. So the people selling the house go back to council, show them the LIM report, go, this was on it originally, and there's been some issue where the paperwork's gone missing or they can't find the file, something along those lines. The council then paid for the fireplace installer to go and check, make any repairs, add it to the file, and the council paid for it.
Wow.
Now, if the original LIM was not in the name, if it didn't have their name on the report, there was no recourse. They wouldn't have had to pay for that because there was no duty of care from the council to the people with that LIM in that instance. So really important. You might be thinking, why are you making me jump through some more hoops? Because I don't want you to lose $355,000 when you buy something that you don't legally understand. And now this isn't always going to be the case. You don't always have people doctoring building inspectors reports and LIM reports. I mean, these are one-off situations. But the trouble is in property is the cost of one of those one-off situations happening to you is large.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Now, what's important as well to talk about is, okay, you get this LIM. What should investors actually be looking out for within it?
Okay, so the things you're looking at are things like contamination of the land. I remember I was talking the other week about contaminated land on a property that I owned, whether or not the property is a leaky building, whether or not the consents match up with what you are actually buying, whether or not there's a history of flooding, and making sure that major features of the property are on the LIM. So things like pools, fireplaces, decks, conservatories, sheds, and retaining walls.
Now, one question that I've been thinking about is, let's say you're buying a new build. And we talk a lot about new builds on this show. Do you need a LIM for a new build?
Very good question. So again, I rang Sue because I know that I am probably a bit more willing to take a bit more risk than some other investors. And so I typically don't get a LIM from a new build. I said to her, what do you normally advise investors? And she said, look, if there hasn't been a code of compliance issued, no, we don't normally order a LIM, but we would ask the other side whether or not, so the person selling the property, if they've got what's called the underlying LIM. So that might be the LIM for the entire site or the LIM for the entire development, and they'd look at that. If the code of compliance has been issued, she would normally encourage you to get a LIM.
Okay, great. And what's that going to do?
Well, that's just that's her trigger. If the code of compliance has been issued, she will tell you to order a LIM.
Okay, great. So what does it cost to get a LIM and what does it cost for a lawyer to review it? Now, the last one I got was from Christchurch City Council. I went through digging through the legal bills. Boy, that was a painful experience. $290 to request that LIM was what I paid.
So a LIM doesn't cost an arm and a leg.
Well, $290, I'd probably sell you my arm to get that. And for my lawyers, and I used to as well, include that within their standard fee of reviewing that. But if you were to go and use some other lawyer, I've checked on a couple of different websites, maybe somewhere between $115 up to significantly more than that, depending on how deep they're looking at that. So key points here, team. Make sure you are requesting that LIM directly from council and make sure you're getting your name on it. Same with building inspections. Really important that you do that so you can avoid the same mistakes that these guys had.
And again, if you are going to auction, okay to use the LIM that's been provided in the first instance to figure out if there is anything you want to investigate further, but you still need to make sure you get your own if you're going to buy that property.
Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. Really does help us get the message out to more people. And hey, if you want to invest in property in 2022, then your next step is to come in for a portfolio planning session. Won't chew your ear off about it now, but all you have to do to sign up for that, whip out your phone, send us a text the word plan to 5522. Be great to hear from you. We'll give you a buzz, see if it's the right fit. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ian McKnight. And we're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of using the property market. Until next time.